had been a golden afternoon, and I remember having the familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the sunrise.
What do you think? So we discussed this a bit at some point last year. But this idea, and we kind of discussed this a couple of episodes ago, but this idea of you having too much on your plate,
yes,
per se.
Yeah.
Too many areas, I like to think of it like you have an army of 10.
Yep.
And you have all these fronts, and you have to,
right.
You can put 3 here, you can put 2 here.
Yeah.
You can put, 2 here, and then you've only got 2 left, right?
Right.
1, whatever. You've got to pick which fronts are the most important, and then some fronts you're going to have to leave unguarded. What is your thought on that? Just how have you navigated through that? Where are you at right now? And I mean, I'm willing to, kind of talk through this too, but
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to try to edit down so that it's not that many fronts, that it's fewer fronts. I think someone could make an argument that just having my main channel and then the content that I make for my channel members, this podcast, and then sort of sporadic post to my photography channel, it's way too much going on. I think there's a way,
especially in one domain too.
Yeah.
Like that's all one domain. That's not
right.
including the stuff that you're selling or like
Yeah.
personal projects, family.
That's exactly right. So
home maintenance,
selling cameras on eBay, and let's restrict it to the stuff that I have more choice over. Obviously, like home maintenance is like, I just, if it was like I'm going to renovate my bathroom, I don't need to, but I want to, versus, my retaining wall collapsed and I have to rebuild it. I don't have a choice. Yeah. I have to mow your lawn.
Yeah. Do your laundry, whatever.
Yeah, definitely editing down the amount of fronts that I'm managing for sure. So ideally, I would be focused on my main channel and the content that's public, and then my member content, which is obviously tied to revenue. They're paying a monthly amount to get specialized content for them as members. The first thing that I would take out of the equation of all that stuff that I listed was selling cameras on eBay. And, I haven't been out camera hunting like extensively. I drive by every time I come into you or go to the coffee shop or run an errand. I drive by a couple of thrift stores and I'll always pop in just to see what they have, but I try not to spend a lot of time on it. So definitely, I want to shed that. I certainly have no plans at being like a camera store, digital camera store. And I want to be careful too with going to estate sales that it's not, well, there's a typewriter and there's vintage stereo equipment and there's records, and like you're spending 15, 20 hours a week cleaning them up and then taking them to the store where you sell them and cleaning records and all this stuff for what ends up being, $300 to $400 a month. You're just putting in way too much time for too little financial payback. Now, there is some emotional reward to that. There is, again, the joy of working in the analog world, tinkering with a typewriter or this thing or that thing, and restoring it or improving it so that it can be used or saved or whatever. But I can't put too much time to to those idealistic pursuits when there's more important stuff to tackle. So to sum up, my main channel, my photography channel being something where I post maybe one video a month, and then obviously this podcast. I would like to write more articles for Medium, but I can kind of double dip often because many of the scripts that I write for my YouTube channel can be easily adapted into a Medium article. But that is definitely something that I enjoy doing is writing my scripts for my YouTube videos and adapting them for Medium, but then also writing articles that would be exclusive to Medium that I wouldn't make a video out of.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's any other areas where I need to edit out those obligations. And there's probably some editing within each of those that I could do. But I think also there does need to be a little bit more systemization of some of that stuff. For example, my member videos are very basic. You know, some of them for the low end members that pay the least, it's just, you know, me flipping a camcorder on and like talking about a passage from a book as it relates to creating content or artistic pursuits or whatever. But then I also want to make Final Cut Pro centric or post-production workflow centric content, and I can do that with my live streaming setup. I can, you know, record myself and my screen at the same time, do these graphic overlays, and I could sit there for 15 minutes and talk about something and teach something, but then I don't have to necessarily go in and edit it and like zoom in on this and highlight all this stuff and spend all this time. But if I task myself with making one or two of those every Monday, for example, like Monday at 10 a.m., you sit down and teach something Final Cut Pro, and you know it ahead of time. You know, you've got a lesson plan, all that stuff. That small investment of time would have, you know, a considerable yield as far as ROI goes, versus the video I'm working on now, which took, you know, a ton of time to film it, scripting the A-roll. Editing is going to be incredibly time intensive, you know, probably 4 to 6 days of, you know, from rough edit to finished edit. And, you know, coming up with a video that I can make that is a 4-minute Final Cut Pro tutorial that takes me a day to edit. Trying to find the vacillations between really intensive stuff and stuff that is still well made and quality, but a little bit simpler to do. That can maintain the business side of the channel, but then my artistic and creative needs as well. So yeah, but yeah, still just a general sense, like you said, that there's spinning a few too many plates.
Yeah,
you need to edit them down a little bit.
Take some of them off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does the same apply to you? Do you feel like?
I've been thinking a lot about just building systems that kind of scale. They scale in a way that's uncorrelated to the raw effort that goes into them, or like the raw, you know, so for example, like this podcast is a good one.
Right.
So, you know, we put this out, and there's so many things that I get from doing this podcast. You know, yes, it's fun to grow the channel, but that's always been like just like a tertiary kind of thought, or it's fun to grow the podcast, but we get time to catch up or to talk or to exchange ideas, which is always great. It almost acts as like a therapy session in a way sometimes, or just working through something.
Yeah, certainly has for me.
It also helps with our ability to speak and process thoughts, and it helps with writing and with preserving our sense of self, especially when I had this interesting thing. I'm not sure where this came from, but it's like outsourcing your sense of self, because outsourcing it to algorithms, because they can do it better. So your self-identity, you're almost outsourcing it to these algorithms instead of keeping it internalized, because the algorithm is more effective at managing what you like than you are.
Yeah.
And
sort of keeping what you like visible, accessible.
So it's easy. It's just, you're almost taking that burden away from your own.
Yeah. You're delegating
it to something else. Yeah. So, you know, having conversations helps to counteract that.
Sure.
I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I look around in areas of my life, and obviously you can only put out so much effort. So it's really only choosing the things that kind of check multiple boxes and doing those things. For example, like I wanted to learn some new programming languages in 2025, and just also learning about, computer interfaces and building things in general. And I'm trying to figure out a way to do that also benefits my writing, or also benefits, building this reservoir of reference material that I can go back on. So, it's like, oh, let's set up a blog from scratch. Let's, host it ourselves, and let's do all of these things. And so that's just one example, so it incorporates a lot of different threads into one thing. So you're putting troops to one area, but that area has more than one thing going on. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think I've got too many plates in the air sometimes, though. But sometimes I'm like, man, I wish I had more. So it's interesting. It's just what does the week look like?
Yeah,
and there's a very fine line between overwhelmed and not feeling like I have enough going on.
Right.
So, and then obviously the seasonality of things affects everything. I do feel like I fall into season, like, if it was 65 or 70 out every day, then part of one of my fronts would be running or whatever. But when it's 20, I care less about having people on that front.
Yep.
And that effort goes towards other things. So, yeah, I mean,
something I'm curious about in the context of all this, what we're talking about, and definitely curious for viewers or listeners too, where they are with what's on their plate. So, there's spinning a lot of plates, right? And underneath that, for me, you have seasons where you feel like you're spinning a lot of plates and it's a lot to manage. I do too. And correct me if I'm wrong in making this distinction. One of my, it's something that is a strength at times, and it's something that is a struggle at other times, is a general feeling of an intensity and an anxiety about being behind, sort of like I'm not in a place where I think I should be in a number of areas, and there's just a general intensity to get caught up. And I don't ever get that impression from you. And that's not to say that it's not there. There aren't times where it's there. You might feel behind on a specific project. My intensity is I feel behind in life. Yeah. Like I'm behind on a lot of areas of life. And whether or not that's true, or it's just something that I've told myself, the narrative that I have in my mind because of some idea I have of where a 45-year-old person with my background should be in their life. Coming here today and doing this podcast, there's a certain amount of anxiety it creates, and not in a bad way necessarily, but it's related to that intensity of feeling like I'm behind, and that sitting down to do this podcast, while it's great and it is progress toward all my goals, and it's a part of my overall plan and strategy to create things and provide value to an audience and get something out of it myself, there's a general sense that it's a little bit lower on the priority scale compared to my main channel, right? And I don't like that feeling of intensity. I don't like that, to do something with you and to do this during the day, that I almost categorize it. I almost categorize it as a generally, negative's not the right word, but sort of like going into debt a little bit to do it. And what I like about you and your energy and all of this, and with where you are, my read is that type of intensity or anxiety isn't present at all. So you you come off as, and I don't mean like come off on the show, but just to me, you know, more even keeled, and that's not to say you don't have, you know, your drama or your issues or your concerns, but just a little bit more even keeled, where old Matt's is like, just, intense.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I guess, that's definitely a compliment, because there's definitely still anxiety present. Maybe not for those things.
Right.
I kind of just take the moment as the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I try to, I mean, you know me, I'm very singular focused.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes maybe that's like an intensity of focus, and I just try to focus on whatever the task at hand is.
Yeah.
And I'm usually not that good at multitasking, so I just give up on it. Like, I'm not going to try to do it. So, you know, you just pick whatever the thing that you are doing right now, try to put as much focus and intensity into it as you can.
Yeah.
And then when that's done, move to the next thing. It's just like a generally useful way, and from my perspective, of how to look at things, or at least that's been useful to me. I mean, there's moments of anxiety, or you feel like you're behind, but I think a lot of that does come when you start to look out and compare to other people. And it's probably not the most useful thing.
No.
I mean, it's human. Everybody does it, I think, but it's probably not the most useful thing to look out and just compare yourself to.
Right.
I mean, it's just, everything is unique to whatever the particular situation is. I mean, that probably is a byproduct, though, of me just, like, when I'm doing the podcast, usually all I want to be thinking about is what the conversation is. Yeah. And, you know, I'm trying not to have more than that go on. And sometimes, though, it's hard. Like, I'll sit down to read or something, and my mind is in a different place. Yeah. I wish I could kind of have this focus when I'm doing things like that. Yeah. And I didn't have to fight so hard for that, but, you know, one thing at a time, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of why I push sometimes towards doing the podcast more in the evenings or on a weekend, because I can be more present. Yeah. Because, and not that it should, but that the sort of the value of that time real estate is, it's not that it's less valuable. It's just that it's more open and accessible than during the day. And this is all just, you know, unnecessary classification of the value of certain parts of the day. Yeah. But I've just convinced myself that if you're not working on the thing that is of primary importance to your financial well-being, and all that you're sort of going into time debt. Yeah. By not prioritizing those things. Yeah. And it's I haven't felt it in a while, and I don't know if there's something about having come out of this break, you know, for the last 70 plus days and getting back into making videos for the channel. If it's the year coming to an end, and like really, you know, like everybody does with New Year's resolutions, and me in particular, like, okay, January 1st, like a new approach to everything. Like, we're going to do this, and this is, you know, all this stuff. Maybe all those things converging creates a little bit of this intensity and anxiety. I don't know. I also think I get anxiety too, because there is money in the bank account. Yeah. So it's like, are you taking your foot off the gas pedal right now a little bit? And again, I'm not going towards toxic hustle culture, but it's like, are you just giving yourself too much time, too much leeway to screw around with other shit? Yeah. Rather than building up like a solid savings account of time and revenue, so that you can loosen up a little bit, so that there is a daytime podcast, or you want to go out and do street photography. It's like you're not having those feelings of intensity and anxiety in doing that.
It is funny. Yeah, it is.
I'm very neurotic, obviously.
Yeah. You will. Like, I think the pendulum will swing back, and you just, it is. This is kind of opposite to how some of the I think if you didn't take the time to just kind of relax, then this wouldn't be the feeling.
Yeah. I think the other element in all of this too is there's something about like the compression of time that getting older has this effect. And I never sort of was sort of like aware of my age and that the compression of time on the back end of my age between the age of 45 and 60 or whatever, like the perception of that creating an intensity, like I don't have as much time as I used to accomplish these things. So I've got to kick things up a notch to try to catch up. It's it's just weird to feel it.
Yeah.
And I think too, there's a certain amount of like, well, you let it be that intense.
Yeah.
Like how you perceive of it and how you handle it, informs your emotions in response to it. Because, someone could be listening to this and being like, look, man, it's not like you've got one foot in the grave and like your days are numbered as far as, making great work and, earning revenue and all that stuff. But yeah, my daughter in the truck the other day was like, asking me how old I am. Like, she was like, "Are you 30 something? 30 whatever." I'm like, "Oh no, baby." Yeah. How old do you turn on your birthday this year? 46 years old. Yeah. And you just sit there and I don't want to get into like it's not like some like sort of
Matt's having a midlife crisis live on.
It's just fascinating as someone that was relatively intensity free for most of my creative life, that something in these last few years has just ratcheted up the overall intensity of all of it. And I can't pinpoint if is it just you? Too much stuff. You're just doing too much, or, compression of time, feeling like what you think you should have accomplished at this point, you're behind on that.
Is it the gap?
The gap?
Do you feel like it's the gap, the concept of the gap, like where what you see that you admire and what you see?
Potentially, yeah, and that's again goes back to what we were talking about earlier.
Like you've got to have, like, part of the gap is seeing having the strength, metaphorical strength,
right,
or time to get over it.
Yeah.
Maybe that's like compressing.
That's right. Yeah.
Before.
Yeah. I think all that stuff factors in. And I think that's what's exciting about doing this podcast with you is the juxtaposition that we both have with what we're doing creatively. And I think sometimes part of me wants you to be aggressive with YouTube. Not that you were aggressive before, but you are doing stuff more regularly with YouTube and your photography and all that stuff. To have more proximity to those feelings, like more of a shared experience with you. But at the same time, I'm like, but I'd like, and again, I'm not saying like you're just chill and calm and everything's great. I'm not trying to say that. You have plenty going on and all the stuff that you're doing and the stuff that we don't talk about on the podcast. But but I think I have a desire to bring people into those shared experiences. And there was a little bit of a sense of loss as you moved away from your prime focus being, or one of your main focuses being, your YouTube content and your photography in a more in a way that it was just much more present from my point of view. Losing that overlap.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm really trying to say. It's just there's more of a divide there, and it's not a bad thing, because I think for listeners and viewers, it's interesting to contrast my intensity and all my neurotic issues with what I'm doing, and your seemingly less not having issues like that, like similar to me.
I think with me, the biggest thing was just more of a shift away from like what YouTube represented or what any of that. I mean, I just kind of reached a point where it wasn't giving me anything, but it was taking more.
Yeah.
And it was just taking away from the experience I had making anything. And not saying that I'm never going to do anything on that platform. Or, I mean, obviously we're doing the podcast on that platform in a sense, but I just, like, I wanted my work to be different than that. Like, I wanted it to represent it, or for me, it represented something different, and using that, kind of falling into what that meant was a betrayal of what I wanted the work to represent for me.
Yeah.
And I think, that's just kind of, I mean, yes, I've really spent the last couple of years just redefining how my process works,
right,
and trying to make things more cohesive, where the overlap is more seamless in my life, professionally, personally, and with the work that I do, and then also just where there was more control over all the aspects of it from one place, and it's not all these like satellite things that I don't control.
Right.
In terms of like, oh, YouTube, and there's like, oh, you're putting things on Instagram, and like just, these models that I don't really agree with. I was like, then why am I feeding into them?
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know what'll come out of kind of turning away from that, but
yeah,
I'm very glad that I made that decision, and we'll see where it goes. But, I don't have any intention of like abandoning work or anything like that. But I wanted to, I felt like I was owned by those things. I don't want that to be the case.
Yeah.
I don't want to feel owned. I want to feel like I'm dictating my own experience to an extent.
How much do you feel like having full-time employment makes ascertaining that easier? Because my assumption would be like it takes, a big factor for me is the money.
Yeah.
I need to earn a living, and I am not drawn to employment.
Yeah.
And building a career and a body of work through,
and neither am I. as you know,
and I don't mean to apply that you are, but this is again the contrast too. You're in your late 20s. I'm 45. I've had different experiences with employment that have led me to being like committed to making something like this work, even though I think sometimes you have to focus on the commerce aspect more than you would want to. Do you think that having your employment situation help to ascertain that wasn't a good fit for you? Or do you think, had you still been doing the freelance stuff with crew work and all that stuff, and having been monetized on YouTube, and I know it wasn't like a windfall or anything, you think there's some possibility that you would have still been in it?
That's probably a big reason, having something that does, like, having, when you are monetizing completely off of the work that gets done, then you are, I'm trying to think of the best way to.
And you're certainly like, don't feel like you have to tread lightly, like you're going to offend me or say something.
No. It's not that. It's more just presenting my thoughts in a clear way. When all the work that you do goes towards making a living.
Yeah.
And if there's still a scarcity aspect to that, I feel like it always compromises what the work is.
Yep.
And, the whole time that I was quote unquote when I was like doing freelance, and I mean, you continue to feed into the whatever YouTube, whatever Instagram, whatever like networking or that aspect, because you feel like, well, maybe this will take off.
Right.
And maybe this will give me an opportunity or whatever. And then I don't have to feel this financial stress. So yeah, having that taken away is a big thing. I'm lucky enough to work in a similar area,
right,
of where I can kind of like the conversations we have on this podcast, or the things that I learn outside, I can kind of directly apply to my employment. And then, I can also apply those things to the work. And I'm trying to find an even stronger, it's like the word of the day, but an even stronger synthesis between all of these things.
Yep.
To where there isn't a bunch of different, like, walled off corners of my life, but where there's more just one
flow between them.
Yeah. There's one cohesive whole. And though I do, to answer your question, I do think that there's a big thing that having that stress or that burden lifted from your shoulders of you have to keep your name out there, whatever.
Right, relevant
you've got to stay relevant. I think
top of mind and
that's having that taken off does kind of let you just, relax a little bit. And you can redefine what actually matters a little bit, in the sense of, what kind of work do I want to create, and only using these platforms as, like, there was no reason for me to make a video every week other than to be like, I want to grow a thing.
Yep.
And the thing I never really cared about the growth of the thing.
Yeah.
It was more what that growth represented. And so, when that suddenly it's like, okay, this isn't gonna be the answer financially, and there's other things that are sustaining you. I was just like, I'm not, there's no reason for me to put out a video every week. And then part of the thing that I got out of just doing the little interstitial videos on there, like, that weren't the, more explorative projects, was getting to put my thoughts into words. And then this podcast kind of took that and helped me do that in a way. So that became less necessary. So now it's like, I'm not going to put something up unless I really care about it.
Right.
And, the good that comes from that is you're only going to get stuff that I really actually care about.
Yeah.
So if it goes up, like, you can, there was something that made me care enough to be like, I want to share this. And is the growth going to be there? No. But it's, I'm looking at it more personally now. Like, I just want to focus on doing things better than doing things often.
Yep.
And not that I'm not like, I'm constantly kind of messing around and doing different things, but it's just a lot less public, and I feel less need for it to be public. Would it be great if I had a, large audience of people that cared about the stuff that I was doing? Maybe. Yeah. I'm not sure. There's a lot that goes into that thought experiment.
What do you think of, again, this is just curious too, for the, people listening, if they're making content regularly where it is scheduled like ours is. I'm curious, why does our podcast feel different to be fairly regimented on? Now, I haven't been as good about posting the clips every Tuesday and Thursday like we talked about. And I don't think, and I want to have that consistency. To me, it's just a failing of making the time for it and all that stuff as far as I'm concerned. But what's your attitude about every 2 weeks we post a full-length episode of this podcast, come hell or high water? Like, you have to do it. You have to edit the podcast. And you are a good driver. Well, see,
that's fun to me, though. That's like discipline.
Versus, your main channel that you were creating for. and this isn't me challenging you. I'm just curious, what is it that makes us happy to be disciplined about coming up with an episode of this every 2 weeks, but something feels off about on your main channel?
I think I have an answer. Like, I think this is discipline. Like, that's an act of discipline.
Yeah.
And like recording this isn't an act of I mean, yes, there's like discipline aspects to it, but every time we sit down and we talk, I get something out of it.
Yeah.
And at this point, we've been doing it for so long. It's like why do I go to the gym on a regular basis? Or like, why do I do X, Y, and Z in life? And that's always what I wanted. We talked about that on some of the early episodes of, we want to just have the routine or have the repeated discipline of doing this over and over and over and over and over.
Yep.
And so we're doing that.
Yeah.
Like, this is part of the project.
Yeah.
And that was never part of the project with YouTube, or with posting videos. It was always, there were different motivating factors.
Yeah.
And once I realized some of those motivating factors I didn't agree with them, I kind of dropped it for lack of a better.
Yeah. And I asked you
because I didn't drop it completely, but I mean, and there's, but I want to try to build away from that platform also. Like, I want to, the thing I'm most interested in these days, especially in personal work, but I mean, this isn't all work. It's just ideas, like exploring ideas, like ideas as atoms, like ideas as just these things that connect everything. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. And I want finding the platform to best, platforms to best explore those topics. Play with those things.
That's interesting too, just the sort of how this podcast helped be an outlet for those ideas and exploring those ideas and sharing those ideas, and it made that exploration through the videos that you made on your main channel less necessary as one bigger contributing factor toward, just kind of going on. I don't really have a video. I don't need to make something. I don't have anything to say that requires a video.
That's important. Yeah.
And the other thing,
not that anything I say on here is important either, but this is the medium's different. It's not as self motivated.
Well, and it's also you're sharing the exploration with, you and I are exploring those things together and exchanging those ideas, whereas maybe making a video on your main channel on your own is, you exploring it internally with yourself and then externalizing it through the videos that you make.
I think there's something just functional about it too, though, where it's like, we sat down and had a conversation at this table just like this. Obviously the cameras weren't set up, but the cameras are very unassuming anyways.
Yeah.
But we sat down and I even think the mics were here and just had a conversation like this the other night.
Right.
For 30 minutes before we had to get out and go grab dinner.
Which we always do.
And but like that wasn't, it was completely indistinguishable other than these cameras not having the record button pressed from what we're doing right now. And so that...
Yeah, there's something about...
It's different than, setting up the camera and doing the...
Well, there's something about, too, like with the cameras being set up, it doesn't really change anything about what we do or say necessarily. There's something about making a video by yourself where it's synthesizing something versus just documenting, and obviously, there's some videos where like we want to talk about something specifically. There's like a little touch of show business to it in the sense like you have a plan. Versus we sit down at a coffee shop and make it up as we go.
Somewhat of a touch of show business, though.
Oh boy, I like that.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm getting sucked into that idea.
Yeah.
This just goes back to yes, Wendy. We all as metaphorically speaking.
It's just you can't.
That's an interesting idea.
You can't control for that. You can try to, and there's certain formats that lend themselves more to maybe a genuine show of, inside out, but
then there's something too, like, and maybe that's why we gravitate towards these conversations. Like, I don't know, there is some feeling that these conversations come from a place of for the people watching us, that it feels sort of objectively truthful. Like, these are just two guys talking about something, and it doesn't feel like there's some agenda. So like, if I go meet someone who's connected to, or, like when I was in Poland for Motion VFX and Peter Lindgren was there, he's a big YouTuber, 500,000+ subscribers. I actually held back talking to him because I was worried if I spoke to him, it would look like I had some agenda to benefit from his experience or his stature or whatever.
Right.
That, like, they'd be like, well, what's your angle here? Like, or if I ask Simon at the record shop questions about this or that, like, is there something about me wanting approval of someone I look up to, or wanting to be in that friend group or accepted, that is informing how I speak to him, and therefore there's some weird sort of inauthenticity to it because there's this agenda layered over it.
Yeah.
And I think that happens in something like this in a lot of cases, and why podcasts tend to be the platforms people gravitate toward most, because the cameras do become invisible. And instead of listening to Nicole Kidman on the Stephen Colbert show, and there's sort of, it's packaged, like, you got to have one little funny anecdote to talk about, you got to promote your show.
Yeah.
It feels fabricated.
Feel charming.
Yeah, right. Versus her on Mark Maron's WTF podcast, where it's like, oh, there she is. That's the real person.
It's really difficult to fake. I mean, at this point, we've done 37 episodes.
Yeah.
I guess this is 37. So 37 hours.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's tough to.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's somebody out there that could probably, like Daniel Day-Lewis could probably make it happen, but
well, I'd be curious from
that's
people
his
watching.
meta project, right? Is the
I'd be curious from people watching or listening. Have you tried a podcast? Which to me, again, is a format that lends itself towards people being in a state of objective truth. Kind of like a reality show, people kind of watch, there's an element in those early reality shows where people kind of forgot the cameras were there, or documentary films where they.
Well, see, and this is what I almost see this as it is essentially a journal entry that we do every couple of weeks. Yeah. And, so far we've only got, a year and a half or so of journal entries, but I just want to keep making the journal. Like, that's part of why the discipline why it feels different from YouTube videos.
Right.
Like, this is just me sitting down and kind of checking where I'm at, like writing a couple of notes about my day every couple of weeks. And we're putting that onto an archive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just something really cool about where we are in time right now, where we can do that. And it would have been so valuable for me to be able to go and, every 2 weeks from the time, my dad was whatever to whatever, if he just kind of had a little check-in and how does he form thoughts on things? How does he approach things?
Yeah.
What's
he chewing on?
Yeah. What is he thinking about? What's important to him? How's he processing that? I think we would love to do that with our grandparents or our parents, and it's just an interesting thing that we have the opportunity to do. And it's only as good as you allow it to be. You can be completely fake.
Yeah.
And, have some kind of, but if you're truly taking advantage of this medium for like the change potential that it offers, you can just be yourself and have a conversation and just kind of archive it.
Right.
Every couple of weeks, you just archive it away. And it's not going to mean a lot immediately.
Mm-hmm.
But as time goes on, you're going to become a different person.
Yeah.
And instead of having to look back and be like, oh, how did I get from here to here? You can actually see that. But then also, you can communicate with other people. You can track ideas. You can track, other people can kind of see how your mind works, because everybody's mind works a little differently. And that's really exciting.
Yeah.
That's what I freaking love, that we can just do this. We can just like that. We can, that's.
And I think it's the discipline is aided because of the ease with which we are able to write our journal entries through our conversations.
Yeah.
And even when I sit down to, kind of tell an honest story about overhauling my studio, there's a extra layer or two or three even of fabrication to it. And while I think what I say and how I communicate it comes from a place of authenticity and sort of like a journal entry, it's a little bit more like prose rather than stream of consciousness. And even like for us in an episode, the variations between the episodes that we've done,
stream of consciousness,
where there's those that, like this today, we just arrived at what we're talking about. We didn't have notes. We didn't do a big pre-show, or we said, what do we want to talk about today, with some agenda coming in, versus a show where it's like, well, let's do a year-end wrap-up, or another show where it's like, hey, Alex, I just read this book and this idea is really exciting to me. Yeah. Let's talk about this. You're coming in not knowing a lot. I'll get you up to speed, and then we'll go from there. So you have all those variations of fabrication, or having synthesized something ahead of time. But the hope is that there always is that objective truth that's underneath all of that. And I bring this up because I am curious for people who are watching or listening. How does that relate to what they're making, what you're making, and how does it relate to what you've consumed? Have you listened to a podcast and given it one or two episodes and just feel like it's bullshit? And what about it makes it feel like bullshit? Is it just like a bank that started a podcast?
Feel like bullshit?
Is it a bank that started a podcast because they know that the playbook of social media is to have a podcast that will get people aligned with your brand and sell more checking accounts? Or is it, and is the form itself, the popularity of podcasts, because it's this sort of like oasis, this oasis in the desert, like of where all, finally I can just kind of have a break and just hear people just being themselves, versus this guy's vlog where it just feels like, and I'm going to do this and do that. Completely fabricated.
Well, I think through the time we've been doing this, I've gained so much respect for the true features of the medium.
The medium of podcasting.
Which, that brings its own connotations with it. But just sitting down and having a conversation, recorded conversation, the medium of that,
right,
is, I've gained so much respect for it. And, obviously we thought something was there, and then every time we put up an episode and we see it grow, it's exciting. And we talked about this on the phone. Like, it's exciting, not in the way of like, oh, this is going to be our big, escape.
Big break.
We're going to get out, or we're going to be whatever.
Going to cash in that
it's
lottery
exciting
ticket.
Though, because it's like a little notch in the side of not trying to do anything, like not coming with this crazy
something.
Corporate agenda, or like, we're going to do this, we're going to do it this way. It's this little like small victory on the side of just be yourself.
Right.
And maybe there's enough people that care that it could, and I don't know. It's just, it feels like a win in the sense of, we could have, tried to do this or this or this, or we could,
it reminds me of like back in the day, like you would hear like the like in the 30s and 40s, like, I'm taking my act on the road, like you come up with your bit, you come up with your angle, you come up with your little slice of the show business pie, and you're going to, present it to an audience and see how they react. And while I think that aspect of show business, when you do make something that is good, it's entertaining, it's funny, it's dramatic, whatever it is, like, that's amazing. And I do look for things like that. There's something about, just sitting down and having a real conversation that you're documenting and seeing that it does connect with an audience
content
that is a nice antithesis to something that's highly manufactured and planned and adjusted and iterated on, or I didn't get a laugh there, or I didn't quite get the thing there, so I'm going to tweak it. And you know what I mean?
I think content matters, like content, not in the sense of like content, but what something contains, the ability something has to elevate, how somebody, or change the way somebody looks at something. That matters more than anything else.
Yeah.
And there's something nice about just the shitty footage doing well.
Which someone else commented on earlier
People
today.
like it. People seem to like it. And it's like, we didn't do that because of, we were like, oh, shitty footage is, we did it.
We didn't do it as part of our act. It wasn't like it wasn't, well, wait a second. If we want to have a successful podcast.
And it's funny because in the back of my head, I'm just like, oh, it's got to be HD here. It's got to be this and this. And you got to have, like we just did it because it was the easiest way to get 3 cameras set up,
and it was the least data.
Yeah, it was the least data, and we could see the little record light, and we could do rechargeable batteries,
and they're inexpensive. Compared to like an FX3 or something.
They're like $20, and I guess we had the thought like, oh, maybe we'll just do this. And then, if this thing ever gets to a point where we can upgrade the cameras, then, but they kind of became a part of the thing.
It's character in the show.
It's a character at this point. And it's just, every time we put that up and it looks like shit. And then I see, but the content is real. It's just not, you don't roll your eyes and it's like, there's so much garbage out there that just has nothing to give.
Yeah.
And, that's all I want to see out of my work and anybody else's work is just like, I want to see something that's real. I want there to be something beyond just the plastic layer.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff doesn't have anything beyond that plastic layer, or it's just pure plastic. It's just, it's brittle and it's hollow. And I think every time, we put up a garbage video, and in the back of my head, I'm listening to somebody be like, oh, you would have to do it this way or this way or this way, because it's like a nice little just middle finger to that.
Yep.
Like, well, I think it is the content. Like a big part of my lens in which I view the world, or my model for the world, is that content matters. And, there's plenty of examples that make me think that maybe that's not true, but then every time we get a new subscriber or something, I'm just like, I think it might, like, just another notch in the belt, or another piece of evidence that maybe it does.
That was a bit of one of the questions I was going to ask, sort of like, how do you feel when we have a rip of like a bunch of subscribers coming on versus when that might have happened with your main channel? And not that there's not overlap there, but that even just with me, there's something weird about how I feel when we add a bunch of subscribers to the podcast channel, where that middle finger, or that making this thing, just pressing record on a conversation we would normally have, brings on subscribers, more people into the fold. There's just a completely different reaction to it. I don't know how to describe it.
I'm sure an aspect to it is validation or something, but
sure. What we're doing is working.
I really don't think that drives it completely. I mean, and I'm so disconnected from the YouTube. Like, you handle that 100%.
Yeah.
I will see it.
Yeah.
Usually,
and I'll text you sometimes if a video's
like,
ripping.
And I mean, I love it. But I don't think it's for reason of.
Is there something like
I don't look at this as like, oh my gosh, it's going to rip and we're going to be successful, because it just doesn't matter to me in that way. But it's like, I'm sure this is like the feeling that if somebody's blogging just because they love to blog and share ideas, and then that blog takes off, and there's like an immense sense of pride in not in the fact that my blog took off, but just that, like, oh man, this is a medium that people, if you respect the medium, people care about it. I don't know.
Maybe it's just like, I don't know. There's something about this not being an act that it makes you not expect anything.
Yeah.
So then when unexpected things happen, like I think there's definitely an element of, if I spend 6 days editing a video on my channel, there's some expectation that it's going to connect with an audience. And when it does, cool, on to the next one. When it doesn't, oh, that sucks.
I've had a lot
Whereas
of
it's the opposite with this one. Wow.
It's almost, if I had to describe it, and this might be the best, the most clear way to put this, is it's like proof of concept.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've had a lot of conversations with people, and everybody has their idea for how you should do something.
Yep.
And
a playbook.
It's never, for the most part, at least in my professional experience, it's never, you should just do something that like it's always just fabricated.
Right.
And the more proof of concepts we can get in the other direction, the more we have that to push against that, that wave of just bullshit.
Yep.
And I think the world would be a much better place if the quote unquote playbook was just doing things from a place of compassion for the thing you're doing.
Right.
And so, the more proof of concepts we can get, the better.
Yeah.
So
I think this conversation too is not like, let's talk about our podcast the whole time. Again, I am drawn to talking about it this way. And I know I've kind of thrown things out to the audience a few times, but I am particularly curious for people watching and listening how this conversation relates to your own experience making work, whether it's a YouTube video like I might make on my main channel or you made on your main channel, all the way to a photograph, a sculpture, a painting, a podcast, whatever. And then also your experience in the consumption of those things. How does this idea that we're talking about relate to a particularly elevated response to a painting, a photograph, a podcast, a video that you watched on the internet? And I'd be curious if there are those examples, to share it in the comments. Like, if it's a video, I want to watch it. If it's a movie, if it's a painting, whatever, I'm just curious the delineation between those experiences. And, I've certainly seen people that have an act like a stand-up comedian where I'm like, what mastery of fabricating something that feels so real and so
or maybe it feels highly technical, but then it transcends through that.
Right.
But usually that is a byproduct of that person carrying, like I think of like a Jerry Seinfeld stand-up act or something.
Yeah.
Like it's so fabricated and just pieced together that it's like fake, but it kind of transcends that a little bit. But it's only a byproduct of him caring so much about the thing that he put all of this time to just, and so therefore it is real. Yeah. It is,
And that it's like, it's a surrender to the laugh. Like the goal is, I want to figure out like the purest way to make people laugh, to do something that's funny, to say something that's funny. And he'll talk about that. Like, man, you used to just make 2 wrong word choices and or your cadence or your rhythm or whatever. Like his attention to the minute details of how to craft comedy is incredible. So I don't want to make it sound like, well, if you're not just sitting in front of your computer and like stream of consciousness creating a comedy act, you're inauthentic or that it's not good. We need fabricated show business, for lack of a better word. But there's certainly a lot of noise out there. And I think for you and I, and the things that we watch, especially digitally, YouTube, whatever, part of this podcast probably is a little bit of a response to that noise, where we said to ourselves, we're having these conversations that give us a lot of value. Let's record them.
Yeah.
It had been a golden afternoon, and I remember having the familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer.